Hey everyone, you're watching The Rollout. I'm Linsay Rousseau.
And I'm Genevieve Marie. And welcome to a new thing that we are going to be doing, a new segment called Hollywood Weird.
Shows that didn't age well. Okay, everyone, let's dive into our first pick for movies that, you know what, in 2022 just don't hold up. They just don't, despite star power and big budgets and
so much star power.
So much. What is our first pick, Genevieve?
Our first pick, and this was my pick.
Yes, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I have seen it. It was obviously not very memorable because I forgot most of it.
We're going to take turns doing choices for Hollywood Weird. Yes. This episode is my pick, and it is 2002's Troy, and 2004
okay.
is Troy.
It's a difference.
Let's give it a little bit of background here. So let's Gladiator came out and it smashed all box office expectations. It was very strange that it did this too, because it was one of the first sword and sandal movies to come out in decades. And
I mean, obviously back in the day you had Spartacus and all of these. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Made of Hollywood.
You had old Hollywood who could not get enough of sword and sandal movies. You had Spartacus. You had the Moses movies, and you had
great. And then, of course, Elizabeth,
Cleopatra,
exactly.
You had so many. They just couldn't get enough of them, and I think that's because they had entire Hollywood costume storehouses filled with Roman legionnaire costumes, and they're like, just bring them back. But yes, you started off this trend of sword and sandal movies in the late 90s, early 2000s with Gladiator. It was so successful, but that's because, and this is where Gladiator really struck a home run, and where Troy did not, is that Gladiator actually is quite an intimate story.
Yeah.
Whereas Troy is based on Greek mythos, and it is not that
it's based on the Iliad. It's based on Homer's Iliad, which is,
it is
a big ass poem.
Right. It is a sprawling narrative, a huge poem. It's literally an epic. And they tried to tell it in, I think this clocks in at 2 hours and 30 minutes, something like that.
Too long. It was too long.
It is very long. Whereas Gladiator is a very intimate story. Yeah. It starts off with a father and son who are at odds. The father does not appreciate or see the son as being anything of note. And then you have Russell Crowe, who is everything that the emperor, the father, wants in a son. And so you have such contention there that the actual son, Commodus, kills his father and then blames it on Russell Crowe.
And then of course you have Joaquin Phoenix just nailing it. Just so good. He was so I just wanted to shoot. I really wanted to punch him in the face.
So good. And it won multiple Oscars, and it was just amazing. But it was amazing because it was a story of intrigue, and it was a story of not only like interfamilial intrigue, but also political intrigue. And you had all of these wonderful little threads running throughout in these beautiful relationships. Like my favorite is with Russell Crowe and his other gladiator friend, the your family is calling you home but not yet. And then like he does the whole whatchamacallit, like the whole narration at the end of the movie. And it's beautiful. Like the connections that are made in that film, gorgeous, very human moments.
Yeah.
And then you have Troy.
And So Troy gave us.
You are hard pressed to find a human moment in the whole runtime of 2 hours.
They try. So for those who are not familiar or forgot it just like we did or never saw it because you're young, this was like Brad Pitt's heyday. So literally he's bleach blonde and like all oiled up in this film with a super short skirt. They give him some badass moves that I'm like, you know, and of course Genevieve, you know, who obviously is engaged to Steve, who is one of the foremost authorities on gladiatorial fighting. There are no Superman punches in the gladiatorial days. Just gonna say that, but that was like Brad Pitt's signature move, and you're just like, cool.
Okay, so Brett, this movie, I will say, it was not 300. This movie is the one that solidified the Superman punch as the coolest fucking thing you could have possibly learned how to do in the early 2000s. If you were going to do anything with a sword or a lance, anything, you learned the Superman punch.
Oh yeah, even if it made no sense whatsoever for the style of fighting you were doing.
Exactly. I have learned the Superman punch for a stage show that I did, and it is hard.
It is very hard. It really is. I mean, and don't get me wrong, like it looked great in the film. I just like it kind of takes you out because you're like, you expect to see it in a superhero movie, but not a quote unquote historical. It's not really history, but it is history, you know?
Right. This historical fantasy, we will say. I mean, because that's what the Iliad is. It's a historical fantasy.
Yeah, because it was, I mean, obviously Troy, the destruction of Troy actually happened, you know, all of that. So that was true. You know, Brad Pitt's character obviously is not real. He is, you know, the son of a Greek god, which, you know.
Okay, so we're talking about the Iliad, we're talking about the epic poem, not the movie.
Yes,
it's not at all close to the movie. Okay, so the movie has to do a lot of shorthand. It has to do a lot of legwork in the beginning to get you as the audience member on board of what's going on at the time. And so they have this like long crawl of text in the beginning that explains like people's relationships to each other, except the thing is that was not actually how it was in the story, and I'll tell you why. Because they had to westernize a lot of what we see in the film in order to make it more palatable for American and Western audiences. And I say that knowing that like if they did it as was told in the Iliad, but like gave it a little bit more substance and story, I don't think people would have really, I think they would have connected to it a lot more than they would the actual movie that we got. Because Brad Pitt, they don't really explain the fact that Brad Pitt is half god.
Yeah, I mean, he makes, they do mention at one point in passing that he is the son of a god. They don't talk about the prophecy about him at all. We do meet his mom in a weird, like, oh, I knew you were always going to go away, I'll never see you again moment. But like, there's no mention of his prophecy. We see him shot in the heel. Obviously, there's no mention about the fact that he is impervious to anything except, you know, this one heel.
Right.
And I guess they're assuming that all of us paid attention in high school English class when we were, you know, and I did, like, I remember the story, but like, so yeah.
Right. So in the original story, the baby Achilles was basically dipped into this magical pool, this magical water that made him absolutely impervious. However, the fingers of the person touching, I guess they didn't want to get their fingers wet or anything. So they held him by the heel. They held him by his heel. And that was the one spot, like the video game weak spot, that if he gets hit there, then that is, you know, it's literally his Achilles heel.
Which is where the term comes from.
Where the term comes from, it is the thing that will kill him. He is also half god. his mother that you see in the movie, which I don't know why. Like his mother in the movie is like a siren. She's basically a fish lady.
Right.
And
They show her
she's
by the river.
supposed to look that way too. She looks just like a regular old lady, and there is nothing about her that would like scream anything that she is an immortal creature, an immortal being. Other than the fact that somehow she randomly knows that if he goes to war that he's going to die.
Yeah.
So like she's just kind of like prophecy lady when that's not who she is.
No.
And they also don't mention the fact they cut out a lot of mention of the relations that people have in order to make Achilles the demigod, and the whole relations that happen with Briseis, and a lot of and the relations, the one that they skip over the most is the relations with Patroclus, who they made his cousin.
That was a little weird. That was a little weird.
If anybody knows anything about Achilles, it's the heel, and also the fact that he goes absolutely bloodthirsty berserk when Patroclus dies. Pericles, yeah. Because of the fact that they were together.
You're right, Patroclus.
Patroclus.
I'm getting it confused with Pericles. Yeah, sorry. Too many.
So many names. Because of the fact that they were actually together. They were a couple. They were in love.
Because ancient Greece, y'all, gay sex and relationships were a thing. This movie was not, you would never know that by watching this movie. Yes, no, this movie was all about,
it's very sanitized.
Love
they also take out a bit that I think was a huge mistake. Because in the Iliad you have these very human moments that really make these characters more than just people on paper. Achilles, the fact that he goes absolutely savage because his lover is killed, is like, he is supposed to be a calm, collected killing machine. He is a god, you know, he's a demigod, but he's very human in the way that he loses the one thing that connected him to Earth and to other people. He loses his lover and he goes batshit. The other thing that happens that does not happen in the movie is in the fight between Achilles and Orlando Bloom's brother.
Hector. Yeah.
The fight between Achilles and Hector runs away because he is so terrified that Achilles is going to win, because Achilles, of course, is going to win. He is half god. He is the best fighter that Greece has ever known and ever will know. And that is a very human moment to have. To see, to be a warrior, to be your city's greatest warrior, to be Troy's greatest warrior, and then stare down the face of something that is absolutely insurmountable, the eldritch horror of looking at something that is so much bigger than you are, that considers you basically an ant, and running away in terror of that, no matter how strong you are, even though you are the strongest human, you are nothing compared to a god.
Right. And the thing is that they spent so little time actually talking about the fact that he was part god, that I think that's what made the movie lose so much of its impact. It's that none of these people seem to know that he was part god.
Yeah, they basically allowed him on the fact that he's the best warrior in Greece.
Yeah. And
they don't say why.
They don't say why.
They don't say why. They don't say why he's so impressive. I don't know if they thought that would take away from the awesomeness of his prestige, like it gives him a leg up on people, but it's supposed to give him a leg up on people. That's why he's so fantastically good.
Yeah.
Um there's a book that I'm reading now called Song of Achilles. It's a beautiful book. My Oprah pick of the month or
Ooh,
whatever.
yeah.
Like it's a beautiful book. Um the writing is very visceral and straightforward. The style is great. But in that book, which is a literal is another retelling of the story of Achilles, he did not have to it is portrayed that he did not even have to practice to be that good. He was just born that good, and he practices because he finds because he likes it. It calms him. It makes him, be able to kind of zen out. But he doesn't need to practice. In fact, he doesn't really like doing it. He'd rather hang out with Patroclus, go on beach walks with him. And that is just something about his character that is really interesting, or would have been interesting, rather than Brad Pitt, whose only goal in this film is to be remembered.
Yeah.
And that is a good motivation to have, but he does a lot to prove the fact that he doesn't really give a shit.
Right. Well, and the other thing that they did, yeah, and the other thing, and I understand, again, they were making a creative choice, but it's like they completely removed, and again, by not focusing on the fact that Achilles is part god, they completely removed the gods altogether. So like, because in the Iliad originally, because we have the scene in the movie where Paris is beaten and he runs away. Well, in the book, Aphrodite rescues him and, takes him to bed with Helen, and then the gods are deliberating over whether the war should end. And Hera convinces Zeus to wait for the destruction, and Athena's involved, and it's like all of that was gone. So it's like you're making a movie about a Greek god without any of the Greek gods.
Yes. They part down to the bare bones, and that it just has a flavor to it that a lot of early 2000s movies did. And it was basically like cool costumes, cool score, have the hottest people, the biggest names, the hottest people in Hollywood.
Orlando Bloom was coming off his Lord of the Rings fandom, which of course they play because they're like, oh, we know who's coming to see this movie. So Orlando Bloom's like a shitty warrior, but man, they give him this epic bow and arrow scene at the end because it's like, oh, everyone came here just to see Legolas, so we got to give him a Legolas moment, which is exactly what they do. And you're like this has nothing to do with your character. Also, like, there's like the really super weird rapey stuff that's going on with the what's her name, who was one of the
Briseis
temple goddesses, and and apparently Brad Pitt's character is not okay with that, or Achilles isn't okay with that when he's okay with everything. It was just and the production design. I know I texted you that opening scene when the camera's coming in, and I'm like, are they all holding cardboard shields? Because it literally looked like they were holding cardboard shields. So
okay, so
I mean, that's a lot of shields to make. I get it, but you know what? After having seen Vikings and Vikings Valhalla, and the amount of thought that went into the production design for that and the props, I'm like, I mean, granted, there's technology's a lot better now, but I was like, oh, cardboard shields, that's so cute.
Yeah, so the technology that we have now, I mean, there's also the CGI boat scene, which you're just like, ooh,
does not age well.
Which back in the day, I remember them doing special TV spots on how amazing the CG was for this film, and like that was a good a good selling point for the film.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore, of
not
course.
So much.
But you're also working in an era where things are a little muddled, and you have to kind of stretch the imagination because you're working with Bronze Age style costuming, weapons,
Right.
and
Which can look
material.
pretty hokey if it's not done right.
Yes. The shields themselves would have most likely been made out of wood covered in leather, which, I mean, I have seen a lot of like reenactment costumes, a lot of a lot of people who put a lot of time and effort into making things look realistic and
Yeah.
how they were, like how they actually were. And a lot of the times the stuff will not sell well on film because it's too clean, it's too rudimentary looking. There's not
Right.
enough there's not enough like shininess, there's not enough beads, there's not enough like metal, there's a lot of things, there's not enough detail on it to make it
Right.
look good. Where I find a lot of the costumes in this movie a lot of the costumes and a lot of the design work in this movie either like airs on the side of being very over the top,
Yeah.
and then being too sparse.
Too sparse.
It
Yeah.
kind of
It's
has
like we
this
got the money for this, but not for this. And it was a huge, like the budget
big
was
budget film.
massive.
Yeah.
It was massive. And apparently it's still like the 8th highest grossing film of all time or of the
I
year.
mean, this film was very popular for its time.
Yeah.
And it hit the right, okay, and that's the thing.
And this is fun fact. Yeah, and this was David Benioff's second film ever. He had previously written The 25th Hour, which was a Spike Lee film in 2002. This was the second film. And for those of you who don't know who that is, he is obviously the co-creator, director, of Game of Thrones. So obviously he learned a little bit, or maybe he didn't. I don't know. But yeah.
So this movie came out, and like I was saying, it hit all the right notes with the audience of the time.
Yeah.
Back then, I would argue that we we didn't expect a whole lot. We didn't expect a Game of Thrones because there was no Game of Thrones back then.
And we expected a bunch of white people to be in the Middle East and North Africa.
Right. Yeah.
That's what Gladiator gave us, and Sparta and all the other films.
Exactly. We didn't have very high expectations because nothing like Game of Thrones, nothing like Vikings and all of that.
Yeah.
Nothing like that came before it. So, like when we got this, everybody was losing their crap because they're like, oh, it's another sword and sandal, it's another epic, like it's
hot people.
With hot people. Brad Pitt's got his abs out and they oiled him all up.
So oiled. I mean, just look at that jawline. Look at that jawline, right? His hair's extra bleachy.
Oh yeah. I do want to say they decided to be historically accurate, or I will say historically accurate to the poem in some very strange ways. Like I noticed everybody's hair is actually the right color. Like Achilles was supposed to be blonde because he is born of a god.
Yeah.
Helen of Troy she was technically blonde, and also because she is also part god-born.
Mm-hmm.
Agamemnon, or maybe Menelaus is randomly had red hair, and the actor himself has a lot of gray in his beard, but he also has copper hair. It's also red. And I was like, this is very strange that you would ignore so many of the so many of the integral relationships between these actual characters from the poem, but you would also hire people or you would make sure they get the right wigs and stuff to like quote unquote look like they were described in the book, except for that these people are white.
Yeah. And they're for the 3 women who are in the film do a lot of crying and screaming and more crying. I mean, there's really not much to say about them. I would have loved to have seen Athena in this film because, well, quite frankly, the females in this movie were worthless. And
I mean, like Athena and I wanted to call her Freya. That is not the truth.
Different pantheon.
Different pantheon.
Hela or Hela, Jesus. Helene. God, I'm totally blanking on her name now.
Zeus's wife.
Hera. There it is.
Right,
Hera.
there it is.
Yeah, like she's, you know, it's Jesus. Like, come on.
Yeah, so like Athena and Hera would have been, you know, evened out the score a little bit as far as the female characters that we get. Briseis is not in the poem that much.
No.
She says a few nice moving things about Patroclus, and that's kind of all she has to say, has to do. She's more of a prop because she's the bone of contention between Achilles and Agamemnon. Like Achilles refuses to fight because Agamemnon takes her away from him because she was a spoil of war. And that ultimately ends up getting Patroclus killed. But so there's not much for her to do because she's literally seen as chattel. She's just a prop. She's just a thing to be moved from A to B, you know. People own her. She's a thing.
So even though, you know, in the movie, Achilles seems to be very benevolent towards her, and oh my God, they even like sleep together, and it's like, that's weird. But yeah, in the book, it's not. I mean, she is a slave. She is a spoil of war. She is a slave. So
Helen of Troy, on the other hand, is also, like, depending on how you read it, it gets kidnapped.
Right. Was she kidnapped? Did she leave willingly?
Right.
Debate.
So Helen of Troy is also, unfortunately, in the same vein of Briseis, in the fact that she's also a prop to move the story along.
Yep.
She is the main prop. She is the MacGuffin.
Yes, she's literally the reason for the fall of Troy, at least originally.
She is literally the reason why the Trojan War happens. And so there really isn't much for her to say or do, other than be also the thing that starts the story off. So I mean, like, for the women, there's not much for them to do.
No.
I can't believe.
And then Hector's wife just cries a lot and has a baby.
I forgot that there's even Hector's wife.
Yeah, because he shows her how to, you know, get the town to safety.
Right. Hector's wife is kind of there to be the ballast between Hector's choice, like decision making. Like she's trying to make him see sense and choose, you know, the pacifist route, you know, don't fight, don't go out. And spoiler alert, of course, he doesn't.
And everyone dies. So,
and Hector, unfortunately, is also hamstrung in this story because of the fact that they took out one of his, you know, his greatest failures, but one of the greatest moments in the story where he runs away. So there is not really a lesson that the audience can take away from.
There's like no lesson to this film whatsoever.
It just kind of carries you along a story, and Brad Pitt couldn't look more bored.
I know, right? I don't know if he's like going for like the brooding, like, you know,
I think
vampire angel sort of thing, or if he's just like, dude, I'm getting some sweet cash for this movie. Like,
here's what I'm thinking went on. Brad Pitt at the time was known for movies that had more media roles in them. He started out as a character actor. I mean, 12 Monkeys. So good.
Fight Club.
Fight Club, 12 Monkeys. There's just so many things that he did before then that he was good looking, and he was an up and coming star, but this just seemed to be like the regular, like, action, quote unquote, action man role that I think he might have some disdain for. And it kind of shows because he really is phoning it in this movie. because I think he doesn't see, or rather didn't see, and I don't mean to pretend that I was in his head, but like there's not much for his character to be doing.
Well,
There's not
really
much for his character to be thinking.
There's no character arc really whatsoever.
There's not much for him to grab onto, and arguably he's the main character, but he also has the weakest motivation out of everybody. Hector needs to save his kingdom. His father is impotent. His brother is an idiot who brought war upon his people.
Because he's selfish.
Hector has all the reason to want to break his back and bleed and, you know, fight and save his people. Achilles, his only motivation is to have his name live on forever. And that is understandable in certain ways, but there's nothing to ground that goal in anything. You know, Agamemnon has a great character motivation. Troy is the only piece of the map that he hasn't conquered yet. And so he needs that to feel complete and whole as a character. You know, like the other guy got his wife stolen away from him. You know, he's been cuckolded. He needs to get revenge. So everybody has these human motivations, except for Achilles. Except for our main character, the one that actually counts. And Brad Pitt is just going through the motions, bored as hell, but looking hot and doing it. So nobody really noticed at the time.
So
nobody noticed at the time.
So that's our thoughts on that. I will say the one thing Troy did give us is a movie where Sean Bean doesn't die. So there's that.
My God, and Sean Bean is in this.
Sean Bean is in it, which I'm assuming is how he ended up in Game of Thrones. But he miraculously does not die in this film. And of course, if all of you know the joke about Sean Bean is he dies in every movie or show he's ever been in, and apparently it's in his contract. It's in his contract now that he will not die in anything anymore. So
I was absolutely shocked. I was like, oh my God,
totally forgot. And that's the other thing is like they cast all these British actors, and poor Brad Pitt's British accent just was. I'm like, did you even see a dialect coach? No. Okay, you're hot.
Which is funny because he does so many other accents in other
Jesus.
movies.
Like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Snatch,
and Inglorious Bastards.
I'm like, dude, if you can speak, you know, not Cockney. If you can speak whatever it is he speaks in Snatch, I'm like, if you can do that, like you could have pulled off a British accent. So
so easily. And that's what gives me reason to think that like
just didn't care.
Either he didn't care or he thought that it was easier than what it actually. It's very hard to play. It's very hard to make the straight action man interesting. There are a lot of people who can do it well. But for character actors like Brad Pitt, like I will argue that he is till the end of my days.
Give him some substance.
It's very hard for people like that to either tone it down and not have it be boring because they usually have so much more to do.
So those are our thoughts on Troy. Let us know your thoughts. And of course, let us know what movies you think are weird and have not aged well. We'd love to know.
And also, if you have seen Troy, does the Josh Groban like credit song haunt your dreams? Because I vividly remember every beat of that song, and not in like the best way.
Not in a good way.
Which Josh Groban himself, like, he's a great singer and he does a lot of things for charity, so I'm not bashing on him, but he also very much had his time in the early 2000s.
And
Polar Express, dude. Anyway, that's our show. Thanks for hanging out with us. This is Hollywood Weird, and let us know if you thought it was interesting.
And we are the Rollout,
and we will geek with you
next week. Can we do it together?
All right, 1, 2, 3. We are the Rollout, and we will geek with you next week.
We
Wow.
promise we'll have this down by next week. We promise.
We're so good, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Professionals.
All right, bye everyone.
Cut the feed.